I'm going on a book tour this fall for my new memoir, Worthy. This was a labor of love. I will be coming to New York, I will be going to DC, I'll be going to Baltimore, I'll be going to Memphis, Houston, Atlanta.
My social media presence is my bread and butter, okay? So you can't just use me for social media and not, don't just start I'm standing in my house.
Will Smith's name is showing up in corners of the Shakur investigation that we never thought we'd hear again, let alone connected to one of the darkest unfinished crimes in music history. Sources familiar with the turmoil around Sean Diddy Combs' implosion, including testimony in recent documentaries and legal filings tied to the 1996 Las Vegas shooting, allege that a Hollywood A-list figure once thought untouchable may have been more than just a peripheral bystander. The claim is that Will Smith, a longtime friend of Combs and once the embodiment of wholesome success, was drawn into whispered speculation among insiders as someone with motive and proximity, and that the motive was jealousy over Jada Pinkett Smith's deep bond with Shakur. This isn't wild web chatter. We're talking about records and admissions from Smith's recently released autobiography, titled Will, where he speaks unabashedly about his raging jealousy of Tupac because of Jada's close connection to the rapper. In his own words from the book, he writes that Shakur was Shakur and I was me, a stark and unguarded way of acknowledging that his self-image was bruised by the contrast between his own world and Shakur's magnetic pull on Jada's attention. That admission, once buried in memoir sales pages, has now become a pivot point in renewed speculation. If Smith's envy was this intense, did it ever tick over into something darker when the violence around Shakur exploded in September 1996? The timing is significant. Shakur was shot 4 times while riding in a BMW with Marion Suge Knight on September 7 in 1996 after attending a boxing match at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. 6 days later, he succumbed to his wounds in a hospital, leaving behind an unresolved legacy of speculation, conspiracy, and fragmented leads.
Are you surprised to know that this is where Diddy's life has ended up at the moment?
Am I surprised at that?
Are you surprised that he's currently sitting in a prison?
No.
For decades, the official investigation stalled until Dwayne Keefe D. Davis was charged in September 2023, and prosecutors alleged gang involvement. But now, because Diddy's name has resurfaced in court filings, including assertions from a 2008 interview where Davis claimed Combs offered $1 million to handle the problem, the narrative has widened to include those who orbited this era's power players. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department has repeatedly stated Combs was never considered a suspect, and Combs has denied involvement, but the rumors persist and have expanded in direction. Amid that renewed spotlight on Combs, Smith's recent confessions about his envy have given conspiracy forums and music insiders an explosive avenue to connect dots that were never meant to be joined. He admitted his mind was tortured by their connection because Jada and Shakur's history went back to Baltimore School for the Arts in the 1980s, and though the two were never physically intimate, friendship in their circles looked like devotion. Smith's own commentary, that he felt a twisted kind of victory when Jada spent more time with him than with Shakur, has been used by industry sources to paint a picture of a man whose self-doubt and insecurity don't just run deep, they stagnate and fester.
Humans are not just good and bad, black and white. They're compassionate at times. They're at times. A man can be compassionate to women at the same time. I was. Look at the lunatic and look at Brenda's got a baby.
We have to be clear that there is currently zero evidence that Will Smith was ever a suspect in any official investigation into Shakur's unknown assailants. Law enforcement records as of 2025 do not list him, and the only arrest in the case has been Keefe D. himself. But when a Hollywood megastar publicly admits that he envied a legendary rapper to the point that he compared himself unfavorably and called his own emotional state tortured, it's no surprise that ears perk up when old cases are reopened by documentaries like Sean Combs' The Reckoning. Former Bad Boy Records co-founder Kirk Burroughs and other insiders have since alleged that Combs was deeply involved in escalating the East-West feud that surrounded Shakur's shooting and Biggie's subsequent tragedy. And beneath those allegations lives a web of resentment, competition, and raw emotion that no one saw coming when Smith's book hit shelves. That raw emotion is not anecdote, it's documented. In Will, Smith writes that Shakur triggered the perception of myself as a coward, and that he hated that I wasn't what he was in the world. That, we're told by those close to the narrative, went beyond mere jealousy. It was an identity wound.
Pac would have boxed him. Pac would have loved to beat his in the ring, raise some money, and give it to the hood.
When someone you love is drawn to another person's mythology, charisma, or audacity, and you can't compete, that becomes psychological detonation. Nothing in Smith's admission confirms action or criminal intent, but it does put his mind squarely in the emotional landscape that surrounded these historic tensions. The jealousy was not something he quietly buried. It was publicly acknowledged in interviews stretching back to at least 2020 on The Breakfast Club, where he admitted he and Shakur had a little bit of a thing because of Jada and explained that he never spoke to him, despite several shared rooms. Those raw, unvarnished reflections are now being examined in entirely new lights by commentators and insiders alike. Even Jada Pinkett Smith's recent revelations about her relationship with Shakur have shifted the conversation. Her own memoir and interviews lay out a lifelong attachment that, she says, was spiritual rather than physical, yet powerful enough that social media observers still frame it in cinematic terms.
Book. Will knows that this is part of my healing journey. Will has been completely supportive of this book.
She claims that they were never romantically involved because there was no chemistry, but even that denial rings like counterpoint to the deep emotional connection she describes. After publicly revealing that she and Will have lived separate lives since 2016, fans have scrutinized every mention of Shakur in her interviews as though it were another layer of narrative glue holding together decades of unresolved fascination. This is where fact begins to bleed into rumor in the public imagination. Put the documented jealousy on one side, Jada's admitted emotional bond with Shakur on the other, and the violent, unresolved nature of the shooting itself in the middle, and you have a psychological tapestry that begs questions no official file answers. In the court of public opinion, motives are often built from emotional testimonies and narrative arcs rather than forensic evidence.
Oh, but so make no mistake, the music industry, it's a dirty game. It's a dirty game. Anyway, you know what I mean? It's a dirty game, so much stuff that, you may never hear about, but it's a dirty game.
That doesn't make them legal proof, but it does make them compelling for anyone with a mic, a camera, or a platform. Behind this resurgence of interest is a broader reckoning with Hollywood's sanitized stories about icons. For years, Will Smith was positioned as the affable everyman, the guy you could trust with your family's Sunday night screening lineup. Then came the Oscar slap in 2022, which reframed his public image as someone quick to react with physical force when provoked. That moment was dissected endlessly, but few paused to ask if that instinct was isolated or part of a pattern of unresolved emotional conflict. Now, with Combs facing legal fallout from convictions tied to solicitation-related charges and the continued unresolved questions around Biggie's passing, the entire ecosystem of speculation around 1990s hip-hop violence has reopened in mainstream culture. Amid that, every new confession, every memoir, every interview becomes a piece of connective tissue for narratives people once feared to speak.
You understand? I think that they don't want, if they was in any of those freak-off tapes, if they played a part in any of those Diddy sessions, they don't want it to get out to the general public to make up their brand.
There is no official evidence linking Smith to orchestrating actions in Las Vegas in 1996, but the emotional context he provides himself is the closest thing the public has ever heard to an explanation of why that era was so fraught for those caught in its gravitational pull. And here's where we see the tension deepen. As documentaries unspool insider accounts and as legal files mention Combs and other affiliates, Smith's own candid admissions about jealousy and inadequacy are being repurposed not just as celebrity vulnerability, but as psychological framing for something far larger than a memoir confession. What began as a personal reflection on insecurity between three iconic figures, Will, Jada, and Shakur, is now reshaping how fans, analysts, and industry watchers reconstruct the motivations and dynamics of one of music history's most haunting, unsolved crimes. Just as that thread starts to feel like speculation untethered from hard evidence, another layer of reporting surfaces. That sources close to those early bad boy and death row circles are claiming the emotional undercurrents of that era weren't simply artistic rivalry, but personal vendettas. If insiders are right that seeds of resentment laid in Baltimore in the 1980s metastasized into the late 1990s West Coast disputes, and if Smith's documented jealousy is now part of that tapestry, then the story we thought we knew may be only the beginning of a much more tangled truth. And as we trace that thread further, what once seemed like retrospective celebrity reflection starts to look like a clue in a much larger puzzle. A clue that refuses to stay buried and invites us all to look deeper into how personal grievances, buried emotions, and historical violence may intersect in ways no one expected. The narrative, as it stands, pulls us forward into questions that demand answers, questions that cannot be ignored any longer.
I don't think they are scared of him. I think they more so, they don't want him to embarrass their reputation and things that they've been known for. You understand?
Who was close enough to see Will Smith's envy turn inward and know how to use it? We start to hear whispers from inside Diddy's shattered empire, from assistants and old managers who worked the bad boy circuits in the 90s, and the same names keep repeating. These are people now watching their former boss face sentencing for his role in what prosecutors called transportation for purposes of intimate misconduct, a polite phrase for the elaborate, disturbing world of private gatherings and coercion that his trial exposed.
As far as, is he going to turn people in? Is he going to cooperate? If the federal government wants him to cooperate and they're going to cut his time, because right now he's looking at 15 to life. with all the charges he had to. He won't get out till 70 years old. He about 70. That's when they start talking about letting him come to a halfway house.
As his network collapses, the stories no longer stop at him. They expand, naming artists, producers, even actors who drifted in and out of that orbit when everything looked glamorous on the surface. And for the first time, some of those insiders are talking about Will Smith. We can't ignore how convenient the timing feels. Diddy's conviction on those charges came only months before the lawsuit accusing Will of grooming and harassment. Both men built their careers on charm and control, the image of safety, of power wrapped in politeness. Now, both are being pulled into the same gravitational field of scandal, the same late career unmasking that turns success stories into cautionary tales. The court filings against Will read like a mirror of Diddy's downfall. Younger collaborators, blurred boundaries, hotel incidents, messages that hint at obsession rather than mentorship.
Bilal has filed a $3 million lawsuit against Jada, claiming that she basically threatened, it comes across like a threat because...
The violinist who sued him described a pattern that felt deliberate, grooming disguised as generosity, pressure disguised as opportunity. He told me we had a special connection, the musician said in his filing, the same way so many of Diddy's accusers remembered being flattered before they were frightened. That overlap is what has investigators, fans, and gossip analysts asking whether these are coincidences or connections. We've learned that Will and Diddy were friends for decades, photographed together at private events from Miami to Malibu, co-hosting charity galas and attending each other's milestone birthdays.
Big was that type of rapper that he could get at somebody, and I think Puff was trying to tell him, don't go that route. You understand what I'm saying? But still putting out songs like Who Shot Ya in the intro, but telling Big not to go at nobody, which was crazy.
Diddy's team once boasted that Will was one of the few Hollywood figures who could walk freely between the film world and the music elite. But the same circles that linked their success also seem to link their secrets. The Netflix documentary Sean Combs' The Reckoning goes further than any outlet before it, suggesting Diddy had an envy for his own artists and a need to prove power through control. Substitute Diddy's name with Will's in that line, and the pattern becomes uncanny. The more we listen to the ex-employees from those years, the darker the overlaps become. One of Diddy's former promoters claims that in the mid-90s, when the East-West rivalry was at its peak, Will was seen at closed-door meetings where tempers ran high and threats turned into plans. That account hasn't been confirmed, but it's enough to make people wonder whether the rivalry that took Shakur's life might have had more participants than anyone imagined. The connection seems unthinkable, the Fresh Prince standing in the same rooms where blood feuds were being discussed. Yet we've already seen how clean reputations rot from the inside. Meanwhile, Jada Pinkett Smith's revelations keep pouring gasoline on this fire. When she told the world she and Will had been separated since 2016, it reframed everything we thought we knew about their marriage.
You need to find a way to make sure your wife ain't talking about your private business.
It wasn't just distance, it was years of living apart while pretending unity on red carpets. And in that time apart, her constant references to Shakur, calling him her soulmate, saying she believed they'd shared past lives, began to sound less like nostalgia and more like provocation. Fans noticed that Will rarely appeared in her interviews, that his silence grew heavier each time she spoke about Shakur's poetry, or the letters she still keeps from him. If Diddy was the master manipulator of his own narrative, maybe Jada became the unintentional mirror for Will's unraveling, pushing him further into a need to control how he's remembered. We can trace the emotional fracture through a timeline of incidents. The Oscars slap in 2022 wasn't just a reaction to a joke. It looked like years of humiliation finally surfacing. By the time he released his memoir in 2021, he was already confessing that his mind was tortured by Jada's connection to Shakur. Now, with the lawsuit and the Diddy scandal back-to-back, that confession reads like a prelude. The public sees it differently now. Not vulnerability, but evidence of a man cracking. Every new headline chips away at the wholesome image he built since the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And then there are the whispers that his financial ties to Diddy's ventures went deeper than anyone realized. Records show that Smith's production company once co-sponsored a charity event managed through a Bad Boy affiliate in the late 1990s, the same period when investigators say money was moving quietly through entertainment accounts connected to Diddy's street contacts. Nothing illegal was proven, but the names on those early ledgers match names resurfacing in the Las Vegas case today. Coincidence? Possibly. But in a story already thick with envy, betrayal, and power, coincidences feel like the language of guilt. We have to look at the pattern of proximity. Every time Diddy's empire hit turbulence, Will appeared somewhere nearby. At the same mansion parties, the same retreats, the same photo ops carefully curated to project stability.
If that's part of the indictment, that's someone like a blackmail. He was blackmailing people to be in the freak-offs. So that's federal. That could be that's a federal charge. He can't blackmail people to say, yo, listen here, you did it once and you're gonna do it again. That ain't gonna make it with the government or nobody.
Industry veterans now claim that during the early 2000s, when rumors about Diddy's private gatherings first began leaking, Will was often one of the biggest names invited, but never stayed long. Some say he knew how chaotic those nights could get and left before things turned dangerous. Others suggest he stayed longer than anyone thought. The truth hides in the silence of those who still depend on the old networks for protection. As for Diddy himself, his legal team insists that the Netflix documentary twisted testimonies and exaggerated unverified tales. Yet what stands out is how many of those testimonies echo each other: stories of intimidation, hush payments, and psychological manipulation. It doesn't take a detective to see how easily those tactics could cross-pollinate among powerful men protecting fragile egos. When Will's accuser describes being blamed and terminated after reporting harassment, it sounds eerily similar to how Diddy's former partners say they were silenced when they tried to walk away. Even Jada's own associate, Bilal Salam, filed a lawsuit in 2021 accusing her of threats and intimidation at one of Will's private birthday events in Calabasas. The case, though minor compared to Diddy's saga, paints a picture of a couple fluent in secrecy and coercion.
That Bilal says that Jada went up to him at a party back in November 2021 and said, if you keep talking about Will and about me, you're gonna catch a bullet. You're gonna catch a bullet.
What looks like a loving partnership from the outside starts to resemble a performance, two people staging their unity while managing internal chaos. We've all seen it before in Hollywood power pairs. The higher the pedestal, the deeper the cracks beneath it. What we're left with now is a constellation of facts and rumors orbiting the same gravitational center: power, jealousy, and control. Diddy sits behind bars, convicted on charges tied to manipulation and vice, while awaiting possible new investigations that might reopen the book on Shakur. Will faces his own legal reckoning and the slow implosion of a legacy once defined by innocence. Every interview, every court document, every resurfaced clip adds another shadow to the portrait. And still, no one from the Smith camp addresses the growing speculation about his ties to Diddy's downfall or the strange timing of these overlapping scandals. We can't claim certainty about what really happened between those circles in the 90s, but we can see how patterns repeat. The same thirst for control, the same need to dominate perception, the same trail of silence left behind to the charm.
Now, I ain't trying to say that's some kind of conspiracy, and maybe some other shit was going on, or this, that, and the third. But brother, he had that conversation with Kay Slade 2 weeks before he was murdered.
When we line up the stories, Diddy's East Coast empire crumbling under exposure, Will's carefully curated persona unraveling under scrutiny, it starts to feel less like coincidence and more like contagion. A contagion of ego that infected everyone it touched. And here's the question that refuses to go away. If the same insiders who once swore loyalty to Diddy are now turning over names, how long before one of them mentions Will directly on record? What happens if that moment comes, and the public realizes that Hollywood's favorite good guy might have been closer to the chaos than anyone ever imagined? We can only wonder how deep this story really goes. How many secrets still sit locked behind NDA agreements and studio silence? Because every time we think we've reached the bottom, another layer peels back, darker than the one before. So we'll leave you with this thought. If the truth about Will, Jada, and Diddy finally surfaces, what will it do to the legacies we once worshipped? Drop your thoughts below. Tell us what you believe. Embrace yourself, because the next revelation might change everything we think we know. Until then, keep watching the shadows. They're getting louder.